it's one thing to not have a bank, but it's another thing to have a bank, lose a bank, and then not have the bank.
What does a community do when they lose a bank? Well, it happened in Escalante, and they've discovered the possibility of being bankless. What's the solution? We'll cover it all on the County Seat. The County Seat is brought to you this week by Jones & DeMille Engineering, helping to shape your quality of life. Find out more at jonesandemille.com. Hello everybody, welcome to the County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. Today we are going to take a look at a pillar of the community and what happens when that pillar evaporates. How much impact does it have? And how does a community recover when the heart of the community is taken out? Well, we're talking about banking and how important it is. On the Wasatch Front, you probably don't even give a second thought about if your bank closes, there's another one down the street. But what if it's the only bank for 100 miles? Makes a difference. We are going to look at a case study in that today on our program as we look at the loss of the bank in Escalante, Utah. We are going to start with a little background on just what happened.
For those of us who have transplanted to a more rural corner of the state, there is a reality that you will probably leave some conveniences of your old life behind. Instead of going out to the movies, you may instead gaze up at the stars. An afternoon of bowling may be replaced with a hike. Currently, we are all learning a lot about services that we may have taken for granted. So what are the essential services that make up a community? Well, you might not find out until they are gone.
I don't know how you operate a small community without a bank, especially that has businesses and concerns going on, even just for businesses to go get cash.
Last year, the town of Escalante was hit with bad news that Wells Fargo was pulling out, leaving the community bankless. Losing a bank may be worse than a community never having a bank at all, because as a community grows, the people, businesses, and visitors grow to depend on that service.
It was really hard on everybody in the community because that is the only bank within 40 minutes of here. The nearest Wells Fargo bank is about 2 hours from here. It's an all-day trip. It's not just, I'm going to run an errand and go to the bank.
When community leaders, like County Commissioner Jerry Taylor, learned that the bank was leaving, they took immediate action.
First thing I did was went to Wells Fargo. I reached out to our mayor. Our mayor was concerned. Commissioners were concerned. And we just went to work on this. And then I started from there to find out if they was interested in maybe selling the bank or if they, what had to happen. And we were told it'd be probably at least a 2-year process to be able to sell the bank and get somebody else in there. And that was, to me, was devastating. And so we got a hold of the powers to be at Wells Fargo here in Utah. And you know what? I have to tip my hat to those guys because they reached out to us and said, look, we're sorry we're closing, but we're going to do what we can for this small community to help, to see if we can speed up this process. Luckily, we had a couple of banks, one selling and one buying, one leaving, one coming, working together. We actually got this thing done in a matter of months. And now we have State Bank of Southern Utah there. We want to thank Wells Fargo for everything they've done to help us. Even though they had to leave the community, they helped the community by what they've done.
Which highlights how what one community may lack in variety can be made up for in values. For the County Seat, I'm Derek Dowsett.
Thanks, Derek, for that report. We will continue our conversation with some of the key players in making this transition come to fruition when we return on the County Seat. Welcome back to the County Seat. We are talking today about the banking situation in Escalante, what happened, and how how a local bank came to its rescue. Joining us for the conversation is the president of the State Bank of Southern Utah, Eric Schmutz. We have Garrett COTTAM, who is a commercial loan officer and a native resident of Escalante, and Garfield County Commissioner Jerry Taylor. Thank you all for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, when I first became aware of this story, I was totally unaware that you guys had just done the same thing in Delta a short while ago, another community that would be crippled without a bank because of how far away it is from everything. And I thought, well, okay, that's no big deal. You know, big mega bank just thinks it's small potatoes and gives it up. Community bank comes in, but it really isn't that simple of a process to just turn over the keys and have somebody else move in. So what did it take? What happened?
Well, anytime there's a situation where a bank is going to withdraw, there is a branch closing procedure that regulators need to approve, but probably a little bit more in depth is the application process to say that you want to establish a branch in a location. So as you'd mentioned, Delta and Escalante both, State Bank of Southern Utah needed to apply for, go through the regulatory approval process, advertising in local papers, and making certain that we had the financial stability to branch in another location. So we deal with the regulatory process that takes a little bit of time.
How did you make this a little bit different? Because it sounds like if Wells Fargo announces they're closing, and they close, and then there's that procedure, and then they say, okay, now the slate's clear, and you start, or was there an ability to overlap this a little bit?
Well, there's a big difference between if you're going to move into their location, their building, everything else. If you're going to just establish a branch, your time frame can be a little bit different. But obviously we need to wait for them to completely close, and then before we could really move in. And there was a process involved in our getting approval just due to the nature of the rural area. We've always enjoyed banking in rural areas. In fact, 23 years prior, or even before that, we were approached by the elected officials in Tropic. And they said, we need banking in this area. So we established our first branch in Garfield County in Tropic 23 years ago. And that was because of the community saying that we needed that. So we've always felt like Escalante was part of our footprint. But when we learned that Wells Fargo is pulling out of Escalante, we thought, well, we can service customers from Tropic to begin with. And then we got thinking there's enough inconvenience, if you will, traveling 40 some odd miles in the wintertime over the Blues to come over to Escalante. And so we began that process to go and establish that office in Escalante.
Well, that's kind of an interesting, and I thought of this as I found you were like a commercial loan officer. You basically moved in to where your competition was. Was there some overlap between the two banks as far as Wells Fargo and State Bank of Southern Utah?
Definitely, especially in terms of our customer base and individuals that we worked with. A lot of people utilize that service through Wells Fargo because they're in Escalante and they needed that convenience. But over the years, we've worked with that area a lot and developed a pretty good customer base to where we had some great relationships, and as you mentioned, that was part of our footprint. And so we're already working with a lot of people there. But it just made sense for us to make this move since we already had some existing customers and saw an opportunity to expand that and help serve that community better.
Chad, I'll tell you on this. These guys they already had a branch in Tropic. They really didn't need to branch out. People were starting to travel over there. These guys done this I think a lot of it out of the kindness of their heart to be able to come over and help our community and say, yeah, we do want to help out and we want to be part of your community, because they could have had us just continue to travel to Tropic. It's a 45-minute drive. So we appreciate State Bank of Southern Utah for what they've done.
Jerry, how did this come up on your radar as a Garfield County elected official?
I was notified about the end of June or first part of July last year that the bank intended on closing in October. In fact, I'll tell you, October 9th, they were going to close. And that just sent chills through my spine to think that we weren't going to have a bank in Escalante, and I know how important it is to have a bank and to be able to have a bank that you can count on to help your community. And to close a bank is a big deal. It says something about your community.
Somebody's sitting at home, again from the Wasatch Front, and they're listening to this and they go, well, what's the big deal? I mean, why do you have to have a bank in the community? I do all my banking online. They deposit their checks online with an app, and they use debit cards to do their shopping. And why is it so big of a deal to a community?
Well, the interesting thing about a rural community is that you have businesses that really are key to the community. And a lot of people coming into there are not using their phones or their devices to do business with. And with tourism, especially in Garfield County and Escalante, you have people bringing cash. What are you going to do with your cash? That was a big concern, or making a business deposit. And so that was one key factor. But one thing I just love about a rural office is a bank can actually be a gathering place and almost the lifeblood. People like to come in and visit. They will stay longer in our rural branches, longer than in the lobbies of other branches in our bigger towns, just because they like to come and visit. It's all about the people, helping them with their situation, looking them in the eye, rather than looking through a device.
Why did it make sense for your bank to move in when it was making sense for Wells Fargo to pull out? Is it a size thing, or, I mean, is a crumb to them like a freshly baked pie to you guys? How is that perspective different?
First of all, I like that analogy. That's a good analogy, a good comparison. I've always felt like, you know, State Bank of Southern Utah's priority has always been serving the communities where we're established, and helping find ways to improve the quality of life of those communities that we serve. And being a local resident, a former resident of Escalante, you know, that's close to my heart. It was always a place I always wanted to see the bank. I was a branch manager there in Tropic for 7 years, and that was always my goal and dream, was to find a way to have a place in Escalante as well, to help serve the people that we know and we connect with. Like was said, we get to know our people really well, and those relationships and connections are part of what makes us as a bank who we are. And we were able to, to me, that's why it made sense, is we were able to carry forward those relationships and continue to connect with the people that we already had relationships with, and now we have an opportunity to do that and expand that even further.
So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to explore the conversation of what the steps were that we went through. We've alluded to them, but we need to find out why this was such a juggling act to keep a continuity of service in Escalante, and what steps went through to make that happen. We'll be right back with the county seat. Welcome back to the county seat. We are in Cedar City at the headquarters of the Bank of Southern Utah, talking about their branch expansion into the town of Escalante. Eric, you mentioned earlier that there was a process that you go through to make this happen. What steps were actually involved? I mean, in detail, what did it take? Did it have to start with the county making a request, or did what did you have to work out with Wells Fargo?
Well, if I can, I'll be very honest and blunt. We actually moved into opening an office in Fillmore. We were merging with a bank in Gunnison. We opened our branch. We were working on Delta, and there's only so much that we could do. And I have to tell you that Escalante was, particularly Commissioner Taylor, was in communication with me quite often, just saying, hey, we need to get this rolling. And so we went through a process of speeding up our application a little bit, especially after the county commission was in communication with us. But we still had the regulatory process to go through. And then we found that as we got into the building that we purchased from Wells Fargo, that had a closing date at the very end of the year, December 31st. They wanted to maintain their ATM in the building for a little while. And so there was a process to remodel the building inside, which we have done. Took time to get their ATM out and our ATM in, before we could actually get that opened up. And so we opened up a little bit later than we had originally planned. It was March 9th, I believe. And so it was a little bit later, but there was a process to just physically get it done.
Couldn't they just swap titles with you? I mean, as far as the bank goes, you literally had to go through the process of, ripping machine. You couldn't just reprogram the ATM.
That is correct. Yeah, that is their property and their brand, and it just didn't jive. It has to communicate with our system. You put money in that ATM, you want it to come to a state bank account, and process through our system. And so we had to remove theirs before we could put ours in.
So Jerry, you spent a good deal of time in Escalante. How was the transition from the community standpoint?
Well, the city itself, Escalante, was kind of in a panic that we were losing our bank, and they were putting the word out that we needed a bank. The first thing I did was, one, I called the governor's office to see if he would help us. The second call was to Wells Fargo, to a gentleman by the name of James Erickson, who is kind of over that area for Wells Fargo. And then I called and spoke to Garrett COTTAM, and then to Eric Smoots. And that's how this thing all started, was getting everybody together, communicating to see what we could do to be able to save Escalante and make sure that we had a bank there.
You've got interest in Escalante as far as that goes, and you've got relatives that have business operations there. In that short period of time where there wasn't representation, how hard was it on the community?
Well, it's hard because when people have to make a big deposit, it was 45 minutes to Tropic, and then 45 minutes back. It was a big deal on people, and they'd have to schedule that, send employees with money, which sometimes isn't always a good thing. So it was quite an impact on our community. And I have to thank the two banks, Wells Fargo and State Bank of Southern Utah, for sitting down and working together to save a community. And that's how I look at it.
Were you surprised at their cooperation with Wells Fargo? I mean, you guys are kind of competitors in a way.
Well, yeah, we are, but there is a difference between a large bank, a national bank, and a community bank. And so our models are a little bit different. We provide the same services, but they're delivered in a different way. But they were good to us. They cooperated. We didn't have any real issues in dealing with them. They were friendly.
Well, we're going to take one more break here. When we come back, we will just take a look at some of the closing details of this and where the bank is headed from here. We'll be right back on the County Seat. Welcome back to the County Seat. We are having a conversation today about the State Bank of Southern Utah coming to the rescue of the town of Escalante, like knights on white horses, to keep banking in the community. You know, we've been talking a lot in the last few months about essential services, and that a bank becomes an essential service. How important is it for a bank to get its feet under it? Because I imagine even though Wells Fargo left, the residents didn't swap accounts right away, and they may still not have. What's the importance of getting behind a bank when a bank gets behind you?
I think, first of all, I think it's important to note during that transition there was a lot of uncertainty because they didn't know for sure who was going to be coming. So even though we were one of the closer banks in the adjacent community, 40 miles away, there was still a lot of uncertainty as to who was going to end up in Escalante, if anybody at all. And so I think there was some hesitancy there in terms of, do we really jump on board behind State Bank? Is that really who's going to come? But I think, like, now that we're there and now that that's happening, I think it's absolutely critical. It's a fundamental part of the community is supporting your local businesses and being a part of that local organization. And so State Bank, you know, we really hope people will embrace that and jump on board.
Is there a way to track how much of the deposits that were coming in on a regular business through the previous bank are migrating over to your bank?
Well, there's a summary of deposits that the FDIC publishes once a year, and that's really the only way that the public would know. But as Garrett had said, we believe in investing in communities. We've always enjoyed the rural branches. Take a look at where State Bank is. Go to our website. You'll see where we are. We're in some very rural areas, but we love that. And we invest in the community. We do something for them. And I can say without exception thus far, the community has reciprocated. They've come and supported us. And so we look for a long-term relationship with Escalante where we provide a service that's needed and they would support us. It's not always easy to change banks, but it's not as complicated as you think.
I would imagine that there is a formula that you look at, because you're talking about opening branches in other communities. And so if you were in Oak City, you know, you might look at that town and say, this is not a candidate for a bank. What key essential parts are there in rural banking that you need to look for in a community before you know that it'll be a profitable venture for the bank as well?
Well, there's a lot of numbers involved in that, of course, looking at the economic impact of a particular area, what's the potential for deposits, and loans, quite honestly. That's where the bank makes its money, is to see what potential there is for that. And as Garrett had mentioned, looking at the proximity of other institutions, and we target a place where we can make a difference.
Excellent. Jerry, how important is this going forward? What is your advice to your local community members?
My advice is that we need to reach out and put our money in the local bank, state bank, because they've come to help us and support us. And in order for us to have a bank, we need to support them, and we need to be a good neighbor for them and making sure that our money is going through that bank.
Do you ever worry that if the community doesn't support them enough, you'll be right back where you started from?
Yes, that bothers me. And then when Wells Fargo went out, I heard a lot of complaints that the bank was leaving, and it was some of the people weren't even banking at the bank. So it's important that we shop locally in Garfield County and help out and do our part. If we want to grow businesses, the bank is part of that.
It's just amazing to me, gentlemen, that something as basic and taken for granted as a bank has such an impact on a community, and the community, by supporting it, has an impact on it. Thank you so very much for investing in that community and taking your time to share the story with us on the county seat. You need to remember, as always, that local government and local institutions is where your life happens, and you need to become involved in that process. One of the best ways to do that is follow us on the county seat and be engaged in the conversations that come out of these programs. So we welcome yours online, respectfully, of course, and we'll look for you next week on the county seat. Thank you for watching The County Seat. Be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications to keep up to date on the program and happenings around Utah.